to hack the game yourself in order to pull some data that you wanted to get.
Correct.
You got to tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so basically, it was actually technically before I worked at Blizzard full time. So I actually was doing contract work for Blizzard, and I was like, look, we need stats in esports. And people were like, well, we don't have the way to do that. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. And so then I just went off and hacked the game myself and basically built a stat server on a laptop that we then put tape all around because we were only running a short POC tournament. And that was basically the start of esports stats at Blizzard. So.
I'm sure that's not frowned upon, at all in any organization. No. But all right, let's get into it. So, measurement, data analytics. Would you all say that it is more important to the esports space than the stick and ball space, or is it on the same level? Like, what do you all think?
So I'm on a different level than these guys. I'm more on the sponsorship and the audience data. So for me, I think it's equal, but there's a lot more information that you can get from esports, which is awesome.
I think you should go because I agree with your answer. It's not mine.
So when I look at stats in esports, especially like in the broadcast, I actually find it to be significantly more critical in esports than traditional sports. Sometimes that's surprising to people because they look at the game and it's inherently native, and so they don't understand exactly why that would be true. But in most sports, especially ball sports, the action all follows the ball. So even though there is sometimes off-camera action, in esports, a significant amount of the action is always going to be off-camera. Or out of the field of view of the observers. And so data is the only way that you can actually tell a complete story, and as a viewer, the only way that you can actually completely follow what happened. And so without data, you have a very small picture of what actually happened in the broadcast.
What do you think?
I think also in games, people are inherently used to consuming numeric values. Skills have a numeric value, abilities have a numeric value. There's all those numbers, and they vary from champion to champion and situation to situation. So it's so important to be able to paint that picture from start to finish with those numbers for the people watching.
One interesting data set that I've been following for a while, is average minute audience, and that's now becoming much more important to the esports space. In stick and ball, it's become kind of the metric for any sort of streaming, Super Bowl, what have you. Like, how important is that going to be to the development of esports broadcast, esports space? Pete, what do you think?
It's critical. I mean, the AMA the development of AMA followed this sort of inconsistent, reporting on data and viewership. And, as this business continues to commercialize, it made it very challenging to sort of look at sponsor deals, media rights, and all the commercial elements that go around esports. And the biggest problem was it was just inconsistent in your conversation. You would go talk to two different sponsors, they would both have two different sets of data, and they would give you completely different answers. And AMA sort of gives you this way to sort of have a universal language, and it's been really critical. So.
What do y'all think? Is that going to help the space at all, getting to that sort of metric? Where there's just equality across it?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be able to do that. And you have to have that apples to apples to talk to sponsors and partners and have them sort of understand from traditional sports to esports. I also think it's really important to understand the audiences within it. Mm-hmm. So the 18 to 34-year-old sort of age group that you're hitting, that's a lot of ages in between, right? The fact that we had a panel earlier with the Twitch guys and 100 Thieves, they were working, I think Chad DeLuca had Louis Vuittons on. The 100 Thieves guy, Matty, he had Nikes on. I'm rocking Cole Haans, but I'm an Air Jordan guy.
I'm very impressed. Yeah, very stylish.
Yeah, I try.
But I mean, the dad socks too.
Dad socks all the way.
That's a lot of style.
But that's the thing. So in my Twitter bio, it says rookie dad, lucky husband. Because it says dad, that I'm a parent. You can infer that I'm a male. Because it says, husband, that I'm married. So you can take this information, you can glean and infer within these groups of audiences, and you can look at a viewership and you can understand how can we start organizing these groups? I mean, if we're trying to get higher affinity with Bud Light, what are all the other interests that they have? So we do things with audiences where we'll take the craft beers, breweries from every state, right? Top 2,000, filter ones with less than 10,000 followers, and look if there's any sort of interaction. Are you sharing Untapped links? Do you have home brewer in your bio? But we do that for any category, so it's really interesting to see what League of Legends did with Louis Vuitton and their ability to have affinity for high fashion, see how that's implicated.
Sounds like it was incredibly popular the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they did a great job from the skins to the Summoner's Cup, but there's a lot of great information out there.
So, I mean, your company is tracking player stats, performance stats. Is it the sort of thing that would be incredibly useful for a telecast on a video game?
I mean, I don't know anything about style. I don't think about what I wear, but we think about player stats all the time. For us, it's super important, and I think the number one goal of a broadcast, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't work in broadcasting, is to tell a good story, a compelling story for the people watching, and to give them kind of that agency of they understand what's going on and they can explain, and then they can come to their own conclusion of what might happen in the future. Everyone likes to think that they know what might happen and how the game will play out. And they want to be able to put that puzzle together and enjoy the experience. So a lot of what we do is contextual. And really it's geared more towards helping the average player. It's a coach for the average player. We do work with professional teams, but we work with the player. And the idea is to allow them to compare themselves to the pros and to allow them to have like a measuring stick, and then take that and say, okay, after the game, now I want to do X, Y, Z, and I know how good I am, and I know how I can do it. So they can understand what their performance looks like, how that stacks up, and then how they can reach whatever goal they have. So it helps bridge that. I think most people who watch games play those games, right? And so it helps keep that loop going, where most of these companies have people watch so that they can have people keep playing. And so it keeps that loop really strong, where it's like, hey, I saw this is how I compare, and I have a goal and I can tangibly see it and reach towards it. So absolutely, I think that it's all part of a bigger puzzle, which is just people just enjoy playing those games and really want to play them.
When we were talking yesterday, I think one of the comparisons we made was some of your data is comparable to wearables for like, a basketball player or things like that.
Yeah. I think esports and gaming in general has the biggest benefit is, and you talked about this, Pete, is that there's so much data. There's too much data. And every second, or actually in some cases 60 times a second, you get data inputs. And in traditional sports, they have to fight for every piece of data that they want to get, usually. And outfitting a player with a wearable is, first you got to get the player to do it, then you got to make sure that there's no motion artifact, and it's easy. And so there's a ton of stuff in the wearable space that doesn't make it as easy. And so we have the luxury of having everything, which is also a dangerous luxury. When you have too much, you don't really have a focus, and you don't know what to do. And so you have all this terrain to explore, and then you need to actually make it meaningful and correct and point that out to players. And then on top of that, the variance from game to game is so big, right? If you take a game like League or Overwatch, you've got even if you manage to get in a game on the same map with the same champions on both sides, there's a million ways it can play out depending on the events that happen. And so you're going to have a totally different game. But usually, you're not even going to get the same champions on both sides, so it's a different game entirely.
So, Pete, after season 1, what some of the data points that you looked at that you use in order to change some of the broadcast elements of Overwatch?
Sure. So to build on that, context stats for us have become the most important. So when you look at what a context stat is, it's a very underappreciated thing in traditional sports. It's very obvious to people that we tell you, or people like ESPN tells you why you want to continue watching a certain player in football. Like Tom Brady is the best because he won X number of Super Bowls. I didn't grow up watching football, so I actually can't tell you how many he won. But when I watch the broadcast, it completely makes me love Tom Brady. So for us, we're always looking for these data points and stats that help our viewers who do understand Overwatch sort of want to watch and play more. So to build on what else was said, people who do play the game sort of have this affinity for wanting to understand how to be better. If you watch Tom Brady, you want to throw a football like him. If you watch, Birdring play Widow, you want to be able to shoot like him.
Good
so
luck.
It's good. It is good luck. But and then we used data to show how good he is, how you could try to be like him, and why you sort of want to emulate that in your gameplay at home.
Is there anything we should be really looking forward to in season 2 that you can talk about?
We're always expanding our stats platform. So we have custom in-house stats platforms for both Overwatch League and Call of Duty League. And so we're constantly adding additional stats data, looking at additional analysis. We definitely have some things that we're working on, mostly around, again, providing additional context. One of the things in Overwatch League that's been really exciting is sort of helping people understand the concept of team fights. Overwatch is really a series of team fights, the way Overwatch League is played, and sort of using the data to sort of show people where this high action activity is happening is pretty critical.
I want to just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, you can submit it on the app. But I want to turn a little bit to ROI, and Amir, maybe you can speak to this. What data is particularly important for sponsors? What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, earlier they were talking about matching the KPIs, and I think what we were talking about as far as player analytics and game performance, we're drowning in data but starving for insights. So as much information that we can put together to help them understand how to do better the next time around, but understanding what their KPI is. So we do performance sort of reporting as well from social media and the interactions that they have. But we can also do video and photo logo detection, understanding where the best place is to slap that logo. But if you're just slapping the logo on there, that's just a ticket to get to the party. Really need to understand the audience and really do things. What Shauna was doing with the Dallas Fuel and with the animation, phenomenal job, like how the corporate sponsor was called out like that. They understood the language and the lexicon of the user and what's the best way to communicate with them.
And the sponsor has to really like it because the athlete is not in motion. You're sitting right there. It's a very clear logo presentation. So as the sponsors become more sophisticated in esports, I imagine that's going to be incredibly popular.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think one is just understanding why they're there, who they're trying to connect with. It's not about the follower size, it's about the target audience within it, and then how can you help them better engage with it outside of the performance of the game and the logo itself, just understanding like who's in there. It's a big audience. And so understanding why a fan's a fan. I saw an interesting report that you were talking about, like why people are watching, Tom Brady want to play, that golf is the closest traditional sport to esports as far as why people start playing. And a lot of people start watching golf because they have that interest in learning how to become a better athlete. But all that is really critical information for how you want to do these executions. Understand why they're a fan and then adhere to it. And then as they advance in their fandom, understand how that changes over time. If it's a sponsor, is there larger overlap between their follower growth? There's a lot of ways that you can show that what they're doing is working and how to bring more partners on. I love what all these non-endemic brands were doing. And so there's a lot of great things to report on, but you have to stay critical to what their KPIs are and then use the information from audience analytics to say, how do you get there best?
Something Amin you had also mentioned was, in referencing that stationary athlete, being able to use, eye tracking technology and development there. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think eye tracking is one of the most phenomenal technologies, in my opinion, for the esports space. It's come a long way since 7 years ago, and my first foray into it was during my postdoc research where we studied fighter pilots, and our goal was to figure out how long their cognitive ability would last when they were being deprived of oxygen. So we literally got to hook up these pilots with about 16 different physiologic measures, so like EEG, ECG, and then we eye tracked them while playing a video game, and then we basically deprived them of oxygen until they almost passed out. It was completely safe,
sounds nice.
because we did it on ourselves first, but it was a really fascinating experiment. And before then, I'd played. My PhD was really in World of Warcraft, not in human physiology. And
I didn't know it was an
and so
option.
I played WoW for Fnatic for a while, and it's a life game. And what I realized was that my teammates, all of us were very different, and our opponents were very different. And I grew fascinated by what made the players different and how their brain started to function. So I went back and I started studying performance. And when I'm like, I have to get eye tracking because it's like a gateway to the player's brain. And it tells you what they're thinking at a specific moment in time. Teamfight in Overwatch, what is this person thinking? Are they looking at the map? Combine that with the voice comms, combine that with their actions because you're getting second by second data. And all of a sudden you have a very complete picture of player performance. For most people right now, that's a little too much. But when we start piecing those together, not only do training programs become more effective, sharing knowledge becomes more effective, but the beauty of it is the technology's gone far enough right now that eye tracking is pretty cheap. I think Tobii sells one for gaming for like $150. You can buy it, put it in your house, and there's a bunch of applications that run for eye tracking. But by synthesizing those data channels, we can analyze that and say, okay, you're getting ganked right now in League of Legends. For those not familiar, a gank is when someone comes in an unexpected place and you die and you didn't notice them. And so we can say, hey, you got ganked, but you never checked your map. You could have seen that coming if you checked your map because we know it was visible on the map and we know that you could have seen it. And the beauty of esports is they're stationary. You'll never not get that data if it's set up. And so it becomes seamless. And you can't do that in many other fields. Like driving, eye tracking is big in driving, especially truck drivers, understanding like their fatigue and their stuff. But stationary, looking at heads-up displays, several different displays, taking in information, how fast you can process information is huge. People always think that a guy like Bodrum makes those shots because he's mechanically gifted, and he is. He's practiced. He has the muscle memory and everything. But the truth is that he's also thinking at a whole different speed and a whole different level than most people, and he's anticipating where he needs to be aiming, and he's putting together all the different information he's getting from the teammates, from memory that he has, like this person used there, all these people have these objectives. So he's thinking way, way ahead before they go into a fight and before something happens. So it's not just that they're mechanically faster, their brain is about 1,000 times faster with the relevant information that they're getting.
Interesting. I'm going to check with the conference group and see if we can do an oxygen deprivation experiential event the next time we have a conference.
Sure.
A question from the audience, and Pete, I think this is directed towards you. This past season, Overwatch Grand Finals were aired on ABC as well as Twitch. Does the platform you're broadcasting to and the audience by default impact the way you present the content?
You know, we've been looking at that in depth over the years, and what we have basically found is that pretty much across the board, our viewers want a really great story told and to tell it as best as possible. So I'll give a better, more specific example, which is we have spent a lot of energy and effort developing our observer system and our data pipelines. And one of the things that sometimes we get asked is, oh, you should just have a panel up that just shows all the data all the time. And what's interesting, it actually links back to eye tracking is, well, so we've done that, and then we ran it through focus groups, and we looked at where people are looking when they're watching the broadcast, like as a viewer. They don't watch that panel. They actually just want to watch the story. They want to hear the casters. They want to watch the player features. And so, so more and more, we're actually just seeing that viewers really want the same experience. And so we're actually just producing a more consistent show across the platform.
Another question here from the audience. What are some of the emerging KPI that you think is critical but not yet mainstream? For anyone. Jump ball.
I don't do broadcast analytics.
All right, we'll go back to Pete.
An emerging KPI?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, like in esports in particular, I think we're just seeing the crossover of some of the same KPIs from sports, and that's just because of the commercialization of esports. So I think, you know, things that have been done in sports for a while, like the logo tracking and sort of some of those, you know, approaches to measuring affinity and commercialization in traditional sports has just been moving into esports only recently in the past couple of years. And so I don't know if it's not a totally brand new KPI, but you know, it's new in esports. So
I think there's a lot of different you know, analytics to look at. Engagement, I think, is like one of the most important ones, but it's about who, again. So it's like, who is engaging with this? If you look at Oppo and that selfie moment that Nico Laurent had once they won. So like in France, they only had like 16,000 followers on their French account. In Indonesia and stuff like that, they've got 500,000. And so, but they hit 13 times their normal amount of engagement from people from France during that selfie moment. So in that case, I think that's something that's very interesting. I mean, like they were able to translate that in a space that they haven't historically done very well. So I think it really depends on the context and the conversation, what they're trying to achieve. But there's tons of data points out there to leverage. But again, it's really important who's doing it and targeting that specific person. It's very easy to paint a broad brush. But esports, I mean, it's so fragmented from even which gaming title it is, whether it's a league, a team. So you've got to get really specific in order to really see the impact that you're making.
Another question here. One common statement is casual or new esports viewers don't understand what is happening on the screen. How can the data make that viewing experience better for audiences? We've touched on a little bit of that, but if you want to expound on it a little more.
yeah, I mean, context stats. I mean, that's like the basic summary there is like you sort of have to provide these ways for people to understand the action that's happening, and it's not good enough to just show them the action over and over and over again. So if you take somebody who never watched football and you just show them a touchdown a lot, but you don't explain to them like that they threw 34 yards and that's X percentage longer than the average pass, like you have to provide those things in context, because otherwise you're like, well, why doesn't everybody just throw 34-yard touchdown passes? And so, you know, when we look at Overwatch League and Call of Duty League, how fast people make it to the objective, how much faster that is than the other people, how long the team fights last, how efficient they are in their gameplay, and then show it in comparison to other players and teams. And then do that in a way that sort of continues to back up that story is the most critical way to do that.
There's something really interesting when you take a look at the medium through which people consume this stuff, is that explaining stuff to people can be really in a different perspective, like extensions for Twitch. And Dota 2 had like a beginner's cast, but I think extensions are changing the way like people interact with the experience. So like if you're a new player to League of Legends, if someone created like a dashboard for Overwatch, I think the pro extension is one example, but just like a beginner extension where you would say, okay, I don't know what Tracer even does, right? Like, so like I click and I can see, and so every time a caster says something, maybe you would see the extension for that. But there's already been some small experiments on using extensions for game launches. Like recently, right, launched a new card game, and we were able to work with them to build an extension. But the most important thing in card games is to understand what the cards do, right? And being able to read that as a new player is really powerful. But like if every time a team fight came up, you would be able to read like, here's this stuff. But just context-sensitive extensions that let people see the information they want to see at the specific moment in time that they want to see, and makes an interactive experience and makes it also easier for them to learn and be part of the experience.
Anything else you'd want to say?
So I guess that doesn't apply to me as much on the viewing experience, but I totally understand that. As
You're
far
a
as
fan.
like,
We're all fans.
yeah, we're all fans, and I agree. Like the stories and sort of understanding it, like kind of we were talking about Faker earlier, and I was watching this like sort of like documentary on Caps and like Baby Faker, and like how he's kind of risen up, and like and that helped me understand his situation better. Love what MasterCard did in the conversation where they showed a story about his dad and him moving around and stuff like so. That built an emotional connection for me, and that's why I was a G2 fan for that. But just again, it's context and sort of and one thing that we do is like right now there's 2 LA football teams. Like why should if you're looking at this entire area and the entire DMA, how do you set yourself apart from these other ones? And so it's providing these kind of simplifications and context in traditional sports that help us kind of get across to different partners why you should be spending money with X or Y from it.
How much do you think the legalization or the proliferation of sports betting and more gambling is going to, on esports in particular, is going to drive future data analytics in the ecosystem? Pete, you want to start there?
Well, we have a product that we piloted this past year called League Picks, which is basically using data and a game system for people at home, like gamification of the broadcast experience. And we found the engagement on that to be pretty successful, and it was pretty interesting. I think we're just sort of waiting to see, where the whole space goes before we sort of determine a next step there. But the League Picks product for Overwatch League for us was pretty successful. So we think it's pretty interesting.
Kind of growth you see with data, esports, gambling?
It's not really our thing. We focus on like player experience and player improvement. I definitely don't know where the space is going
You
yet.
can have an opinion on it. Do you think there's a lot of room for growth there?
Yeah, sure. We've had talks with groups that want to use the data that we crunch to power their gambling systems. I think for us, right now we're just specifically focused on the player experience rather than thinking of that. But I think it's inevitable. People, when they watch something or consume something, they want to feel like they know the right outcome. They want to feel rewarded for knowing the right outcome, and they want to feel like they did it in a smart way and used specific numbers that they thought were great. So I think understanding the data in context is going to make a lot of people happy because they'll be able to make the right conclusions, and also making the wrong conclusions is going to make a lot of people upset, and you'll see a lot of that too because I think esports data is incredibly complex and context dependent.
I think it's really interesting because if you look at fantasy and what that's done in traditional sports,
it's grown a sport.
Created a new type of fan. I mean, like the amount of information that they're consuming, they've turned a new sport out of a sport, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and that's a predisposed sort of sports betting in itself. I think there's a lot of information that's going to become of it. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how that kind of changes and shifts how people play or get interfaced with new sort of gaming titles and stuff like that. So I think it's really cool.
Well, you mentioned fantasy, and that obviously brought an incredible number of casual fans to maybe to watch the sport that they wouldn't have. I mean, do you think that can attract the casual fan to esports to watch a broadcast where they wouldn't have?
Yeah, I mean, I can immediately see somebody, making a bet in the very beginning once they win. It just brings them into the sport itself.
It's a totally different demo, much older
yeah.
demo potentially that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, right?
Yeah.
I mean, talking about reach, with what demos can esports look for significant growth? Pete, you want to start on that one?
Well, we see significant growth in the 18 to 34, which is obviously super attractive. I mean, we were up 13% in the U.S. last year in AMA measured. One of the only sports that has seen growth in the 18 to 34 demo. So I think for us, it's really just continuing to focus on that demo and sort of still building on that. A lot of the people in that demo grew up on games, and so for them, esports is just sort of a natural extension to their life, really. And so that's really where we're pretty focused right now.
All right. Amir, what stats do you think the top streaming platforms need to show more of, maybe less of, from what you've seen?
I think it's really interesting to see what Twitch is doing with diversifying the content that they have on their platform. What they've been doing with soccer right now with the women's. I mean, it's really fascinating. So they're creating more content, and if you look at their marketing efforts, like you're already one of us. I mean, they're trying to get more people onto their platform. So I think the diversification of content, the just chatting stuff like that, will bring a lot more people in.
It's just chatting like top 3 games every night, basically.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I like to see them with less oxygen. But it's I think
I don't think that needs less oxygen for the shenanigans there.
Yeah.
So another question from the audience. Pete, I believe this is directed to you. Are you able to collect any data on spectators, fans that attend an event? And if so, how is that done? What specific value does it bring?
Yeah, we do sometimes collect some data. I mean, some of it's done through pretty traditional sources like surveys. We also obviously have things like zip code data from ticket sales. So we use that to basically just sort of gauge like where future tournaments should be, and then we try to take that and we look at how to build better experiences for people, better packages, sort of better like on-site experiences.
So like next 12 to 18 months, each of you kind of go down here. What's the most important thing you're going to be watching, in the data analytics space?
Everything.
No, thank you for being specific about it too. As specific as you can get.
So my aspect's going to be a little different, but I think it's the more non-endemic brands getting involved in the conversation, and then looking at the demographics or how that's evolving as well. So there's more and more audiences coming on, like 18 to 34, you said, growing amazingly. Video games like Halo was my game of choice, and then I got into Call of Duty, and watching the CDL come together. Like I'm really excited about all of that, but. Again, it's all the non-endemic brands kind of coming into the conversation. Find that very fascinating. What Louis Vuitton did, I thought was absolutely amazing with the skins and how they got involved, and they had their lead designer go to Riot Games. Stuff like that I find very fascinating.
Is that a byproduct of just like new blood coming into the industry, having new ideas, getting new people that wanted to be in esports?
Yeah, and I think it also exposed audience affinities towards luxury items that people, when it was brought up earlier, everyone kind of laughed at it. But I mean, there was clearly something there. We saw people that engaged with the content on Instagram had 6 times more likely to have an affinity towards luxury items. So like being able to look at that across other different audiences and find ways to find partners in that opportunity, I think is really critical. And you're going to have to bring other brands in order to grow and make the industry more lucrative. As much money is coming in, you got comments like from Mark Cuban, even though it's a short-term like sort of play, but sponsorship money is going to help really push that needle.
I mean, what are you watching?
Well, I think to us the most important thing is making the data as personal as possible, the insights, not the data. And so being able to figure out what pieces of the data lead to the best personal insights. So to give you an example, the average person playing a game today is these games change all the time, every 2 weeks. The games change, and the players, usually you have like weekend warriors or people who play regularly throughout the week or whatever. And so understanding when a person's optimal times to play are, when their optimal patch cycles are to play, like when certain types of heroes are buffed or nerfed, when it's a certain type of specific meta, and then how tired they are when they play and being able to warn them. So something like eye tracking, for example, or like if they're wearing an Apple Watch with heart rate, you can tell that from their heart rate variability, different things like that. And being able to combine all those different channels to deliver personalized insights to them at the right time so that they can play better is what we're focused on. And also, one thing we show is like an activity graph of when you're playing, but also these people play multiple games. And so when a new game comes out, there's an expectation for them to play that new game. Or when there's dead season, like right now is League of Legends dead season, so people go try other games till the next season and they play around with the patch and they experience. But fundamentally, a player who plays an aggressive type of champion or aggressive playstyle doesn't go and play a passive support playstyle in another game. So taking data from how they play other games and combining that so that you can suggest the best way for them to play so that nobody likes to lose. It doesn't matter how casual you are, everyone wants to win in that moment, and so they have a better experience playing and feeling like they did a good job and that they enjoyed the game as much as possible. So that's what we'll be watching.
Pete, what are you watching?
What to do with the data. So we have 2 Premier Leagues. We have Overwatch League and Call of Duty League. And so they're kind of both at different states, and it kind of presents the same but slightly different challenge to tackle, which is how we sort of are finding like the Moneyball data stat point. So like, the game's changed, the meta changes. Call of Duty League is newly launching in January for the first time. So, we're not sure yet like what is going to be the most important stat to help tell the story. And so for us, it's really just figuring out a way to look at this mass amount of data and then refine it down and then constantly evolve throughout the whole season and even through the next few seasons ahead. Because like, I don't think that there sort of is that like, Moneyball found on base percentage, right? And I don't think we've really found that in esports yet. I don't think there's like the secret stat hasn't been found yet.
You think there is a smoking gun secret stat?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of data scientists like yourself that, are working on that. Yeah. So I think it'd be really great to have that. It would help our viewers a lot.
Got a couple minutes left.
Back to work.
Get you guys out of here in a couple quick hitters. So the game as a kid that really lit your passion for video games, what is it? Start with you, Pete.
Wow. I remember playing with my grandmother, Pong, and it's kind of, maybe a little corny, but I just sort of remember this like very basic, gameplay. I don't know. I guess that's probably for me, like, it just kind of started.
It's a solid title.
And I loved it was multi-generational. My grandmother more than my parents played video games, and so we played together, and that kind of got me into it. So.
Interesting. I mean,
Unlike you, my parents didn't play, wouldn't go anywhere near it, but I played Mario at a cousin's house when I was like 5, and I just annoyed the hell out of my dad till he got us Mario for Christmas, and so the first Mario Brothers. And from then on, it was basically, as long as we got A's in school, we could play whatever we wanted, however much we wanted.
Low bar.
So school was really easy compared to video games back then. I don't know if anyone played video games in the old days, but that shit was hard. Yeah.
No, nowadays it's like you tell your kids, like, go home, get on the line, start playing video games.
start training.
Stop playing with that basketball. Get back online. So for me, it was Mario was the first one, but then Halo is really where it went off with the battle rifle. That's my gun of choice, and then Call of Duty is Modern Warfare. When that came out, that just changed my world. I love playing that game. So
can I say Duck Hunt? Does that age me too much? Is that
that's
okay?
where I started.
Duck Hunt,
If you shoot
64.
like that.
But
Can you look at Call of Duty Mobile like modern Duck Hunt?
I am addicted to that game.
Last question though. You go home now. What's the game you're going to play? You go home on any given day. What's the game you're going to play?
Call of Duty Mobile. It's just so easy because it's on my iPhone. So
Legends of Runeterra, it's on a 5-day beta thing. So.
And you can't say Call of Duty. I'm gonna hold you to the fire here.
I play a lot of Call of Duty
Sorry,
Mobile.
Overwatch. You can't say Overwatch.
No, I play a lot of Call of Duty Mobile right now.
All right.
So I'm a heavy mobile gamer, and so the day that Call of Duty Mobile was out, I was playing. We all play at work too, so it helps.
It does. Training. On the job training. I like it. Thank you to all my panelists, for talking about data here this afternoon. And we're going to get to our last session of the day. Jim?
Okay.